I stood there, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and polite applause, as my own daughter looked right past me and said, "My father couldn't be here tonight. He passed away years ago." The words hit harder than any punch could. Every breath felt like proof that I was alive. Yet in that room, in front of hundreds of people, I had never felt more invisible. I had built her world, paid for every brick, every dream, and in one polished sentence, she buried me to fit into a world that never wanted me there. Betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes wrapped in a smile, spoken through champagne and lies. And when the truth finally demands its payment, it doesn't ask. It arrives with a bill no one expects to pay. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. The late afternoon air on Kiowa Island carried the heaviness of salt and humidity, the kind that clings to a man's collar and makes him remember where he came from. I pulled my dusty Ford F-250 into the valet line at Magnolia Hall, where the weekend elite of Charleston had already arrived in Bentleys, Teslas, and a vintage Jaguar with vanity plates that probably cost more than my truck. The valet boys looked about 19, sharp in white gloves and vests. One of them took my keys with a hesitant smile, as if unsure whether my pickup belonged in a place that smelled like imported lilies and champagne. I didn't blame him. Even I wasn't sure I belonged here tonight. Magnolia Hall looked like something out of a glossy wedding magazine. White columns wrapped in silk, a fountain spilling into a marble basin. Strings of fairy lights hung across the veranda. Inside, the ballroom glittered beneath 12 chandeliers. Spanish moss framed every arched window. A jazz trio played near the bar where pearls and cufflinks flashed beneath golden light. I walked through the crowd quietly, nodding at strangers who didn't nod back. People like these could spot a blue-collar man before he opened his mouth. 350 guests filled the room, Charleston's old families with names printed on university plaques and hospital wings. Every detail of the evening shouted money: the $1,200 a bottle champagne, the orchids imported from Hawaii, the monogrammed napkins with intertwined letters B and H for Brooke and Harrison. I glanced toward the ceiling and caught sight of the HVAC vents my company had installed years ago. I could almost hear the steady hum of my work above all that laughter, a reminder that invisible hands like mine kept their world cool and comfortable. I built Ellison Mechanical and Solar with calloused hands and late nights, starting from a one-man shop behind a rented warehouse. 30 years of hurricanes, busted compressors, and payroll worries had carved out a living I could be proud of. My trucks roamed across the Carolinas now, bright red with white lettering, servicing mansions like this one. Folks knew the name, but they never pictured a man in dusty boots behind it. They imagined someone cleaner, smoother. Maybe that's why my daughter had learned to hide me so well. Brooke drifted through the ballroom like she was born to it, radiant in a silk Oscar de la Renta gown that shimmered with every camera flash. I watched her laugh among the Caldwells, her new family, like she'd always belonged there. When her eyes brushed mine, she froze for half a second before turning away, smiling at someone more convenient to acknowledge. The look was quick but sharp, like a paper cut. They'd placed me at table 27, near the service door where the catering staff rushed in and out. From there, I could hear the clatter of trays, the hiss of the kitchen, and the faint hum of the cooling system. Across the room, Brooke sat at table 1, center stage beneath the chandelier, surrounded by her in-laws. That table glowed. Mine stayed in shadow. I poured myself a small glass of bourbon and tried to blend into the wallpaper. $500,000 had already been paid toward this wedding, and another $620,000 waited in a corporate escrow account under my authorization. Venue and decor, $260,000. Catering and bar, $210. Lights, sound, and stage, $140. Flowers, yacht, fireworks, every extravagant detail she'd dreamed of. Each contract bore my signature. I told myself it was an investment in her happiness. I just hadn't expected that happiness to come without me in it. As I sat there, a memory surfaced. The night my wife died, Brooke's mother, her fingers frail as she made me promise to take care of our girl. I'd done that the only way I knew, through money, opportunity, and protection. Maybe too much of all three. Somewhere between paying her Duke tuition and buying her Manhattan apartment, I'd mistaken providing for parenting. The air conditioning kicked on, stirring the orchids near my table. The sudden chill felt ironic in the southern heat. I looked up at the chandelier, traced the hidden wires with my eyes, and realized I understood every bolt in this building, but not my own daughter anymore. Around me, laughter rose like static. Someone toasted to the bride's remarkable family heritage, a phrase that made my stomach twist. A waiter brushed past, nearly bumping my chair, and murmured, "Sorry, sir." I nodded, feeling more like staff than guest. I took another sip of bourbon and glanced again toward Brooke. She leaned into her fiancé, whispering something that made him laugh. The spotlight glowed on her skin, and for a moment she looked untouchable, perfectly sculpted for this world that I'd helped fund but would never enter. The orchestra began tuning for the ceremony. I checked my watch, 4:30. The evening would stretch long ahead, filled with speeches and performances. I told myself I'd keep quiet, let her have her perfect night. She had earned her fairy tale, even if it cost me my seat at the table. As I leaned back, the bourbon burned warm in my chest. If money could buy belonging, I thought, I'd already have a seat at table 1. If you're still watching and this moment hit you right in the chest, drop a number 1 in the comments to let me know you're still here. Trust me, it's only getting deeper from here. The ballroom shimmered with gold light and polite laughter as servers weaved through clusters of guests carrying trays of champagne. My phone buzzed just as the orchestra shifted into a soft waltz. A message from Brooke flashed on the screen. "Dad, please don't mention the company tonight. Everyone's sensitive about appearances." I stared at it, reading the words again until the letters blurred. It wasn't a request. It was a warning disguised as courtesy. The same daughter who once bragged that her father could fix anything, now treated my presence like a leak to be sealed before someone noticed. I slipped the phone into my pocket, forcing my breathing steady. Around me, the social ecosystem moved with practiced rhythm. The Caldwells glided from group to group, greeting senators, bankers, museum donors. Brooke mirrored their poise flawlessly, her smile precise, her gestures deliberate. She had studied their dialect of charm, the nods that said we belong, and the laughter that erased those who didn't. My table, number 27, sat on the outer ring of the ballroom near a service door. From here, I could see everyone but be seen by no one. A man in a white dinner jacket leaned toward his wife at the next table and whispered something about working-class charm. They both laughed. I turned my bourbon glass slowly between my fingers and thought about the way money could build walls taller than any structure my company had ever serviced. Then Harrison Caldwell Sr. stood, clinking his glass. The room hushed instantly, a reflex born from decades of deference. His voice carried that patrician ease, a sound bred in generations of entitlement. "Before we begin dinner," he said, "I'd like to thank the man who shaped Brooke into the extraordinary woman she is today, Robert Whitaker." Polite applause filled the room, warm and ignorant. Robert rose, stiff smile, a man clearly out of his depth yet flattered by the spotlight. Brooke slipped her arm through his, glowing. My pulse thudded in my ears. I'd been erased in front of 300 people, buried alive under polite clapping. Catherine Shaw, the venue manager, appeared beside me with the quiet precision of someone who had seen too many family dramas behind chandeliers. "Mr. Ellison," she murmured, "a reminder that the final escrow authorization is due before 9:15. We just want to ensure everything runs smoothly." I nodded, unable to speak. The number, 620,000, spun in my mind like a metronome counting down the hours. The applause faded, replaced by a low buzz of conversation. Hal Caldwell III, the groom, made his way toward me with a smile that belonged in a brochure. "Mr. Ellison," he said, extending his hand, "Brooks told me how practical you are." His grip was limp, polite but distant. Practical. Not successful, not accomplished, just practical. A word that kept me somewhere below the velvet rope. "We appreciate everything you've done," he added. "She'll never have to worry about money again." The arrogance was subtle, sweetened by confidence. We would take care of her now. I smiled back, though I could taste the bile behind it. When he drifted away, I reached for the envelope in my jacket, the contracts, the receipts, the entire paper trail of who truly paid for this fantasy. Claire Donnelly, my lawyer, had insisted on adding a clause I'd thought excessive. If the family publicly disrespects or disowns the financier, escrow may be frozen at client discretion. I'd agreed only because I liked tidy paperwork. Now, the clause pulsed in my mind like a hidden trigger. Robert Whitaker passed near my table, chatting with a city councilman about raising Brooke after her mother passed. His voice trembled slightly, like a man acting in a play he didn't audition for. Brooke stayed beside him, radiant, proud. I wondered if she felt even a flicker of shame. Maybe not. Shame requires memory. Around me, the chatter turned toward art auctions, foundation galas, yacht permits. These people didn't see the invisible lattice that kept their world running. The electricians, the plumbers, the men with tool belts and cracked hands. My hands. I pressed my thumb against the rim of my glass, noticing how the callus scraped against crystal. The orchestra shifted again, violins rising into the opening of the grand waltz. Brooke was about to make her pre-ceremony entrance. I checked my watch, 7 o'clock, 2 hours and 15 minutes until the deadline. My thumb brushed over my phone screen, hovering above the escrow app. One tap could release the funds, keep the illusion intact. Another could stop everything. I watched Brooke across the room, laughing with the Caldwells, her face bright and unburdened. Every smile she gave them was a small subtraction from me. The bourbon burned its way down, bitter and grounding. The air smelled of orchids and money. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the click of something shifting, a decision beginning to form, quiet but irreversible. She wanted me to vanish politely, but I've spent my life building systems where pressure finds release eventually. Silence, I realized, can be the loudest thing in a room. If you're still watching and can feel the tension building, type number 2 below so I know you're with me. Things are about to take a turn you won't believe. The music had grown louder, the laughter looser. Crystal glasses chimed across the ballroom like tiny bells, and the air smelled of money, floral, sweet, heavy. From my seat at table 27, I could see nearly everything. Brooke looked effortless, gliding between groups of donors and society women, her gown whispering across the marble. Every move she made told the same story. A woman perfectly at home in her new world. My world, apparently, was somewhere beyond the chandeliers. The MC tapped the microphone, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, before dinner, please welcome the father of the bride, Mr. Robert Whitaker." Spotlights swept the room, landing on the stage where Robert stood beside Brooke. The applause was instant, thunderous, unquestioning. He waved awkwardly, cheeks red from champagne. Brooke held his arm like a lifeline, beaming toward the crowd. For a second, the sound fell away. I couldn't hear the music, the clinking glasses, the polite laughter, only the steady drumbeat of my pulse. I'd spent years learning to stay calm under pressure, burst pipes, failing systems, storms that shut down entire projects. But nothing prepared me for being erased while I was still breathing. I reached for my drink, the ice long melted, and noticed the reflection of my hands on the table, strong, scarred, hands that built everything she was standing in. Then a familiar voice sliced through the noise. "Mark Ellison, didn't know you were here." I turned. Troy Benson, owner of the Harborview Grill, grinned at me from 3 tables away, his shout cut across the ballroom, drawing startled looks. "I didn't realize you were the bride's father." The words hung in the air like a dropped glass. Conversations faltered. Heads turned, one by one, toward me. A murmur spread. "Wait, I thought her father was Robert. Didn't she say he passed away?" Laughter died, replaced by confusion thick enough to taste. Brooke froze on stage, her smile collapsing into panic. Robert blinked, then looked down as though hoping the floor would swallow him. Catherine Shaw appeared beside me almost instantly, professional calm covering unease. "Mr. Ellison," she whispered, "are we still good for the payment schedule?" Her voice was gentle but carried the weight of a $250,000 question. I didn't look at her. My eyes stayed locked on my daughter. "That depends," I said quietly, "on how the night goes." Brooke's phone lit up at the head table. I saw her glance down, type furiously. My pocket buzzed seconds later. "Please don't make a scene. I'll explain later." I stared at the words until they blurred. The nerve of it, calling my existence a scene. I set the phone face down. For a moment, I drifted back years to a freezing winter in North Carolina when Brooke called sobbing because a pipe burst in her college apartment. I'd driven 6 hours through black ice to fix it myself. She'd hugged me then, whispering, "You're my hero, Dad." I blinked and saw her again on that stage, introducing another man as her father. The orchestra picked up a new song, trying to drown the whispers. Guests forced small talk, pretending not to notice the tension that coiled through the room like smoke. From the corner of my eye, I caught a waiter watching me, sympathetic, understanding in the quiet way only another working man could be. Robert finally approached, clutching his champagne glass like a shield. "Mark," he said softly, "Harrison asked me to stand in. I didn't mean disrespect. Brooke thought—" I cut him off. "You can't disrespect what you never earned, Robert." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "But they can." His face went pale. He muttered something and backed away, disappearing into the crowd. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Brooke. It was Claire Donnelly, my attorney. Escrow authorization pending. Deadline 9:15 p.m. You're still in control. Still in control. I repeated the words silently, feeling them settle like anchors inside me. Control wasn't about money. It was about truth, leverage, and knowing when to use both. Around me, the crowd resumed its hum, but their laughter sounded brittle now. The illusion of the perfect evening had cracked. I could feel their eyes flick toward me and away again, afraid to look too long. Brooke avoided my gaze completely, keeping her face angled toward her new in-laws. I straightened my tuxedo and set the empty glass aside. For 26 years, I'd built a life where integrity mattered more than polish. Tonight, that same integrity would be my weapon. They'd mistaken quiet for weakness, humility for absence. I stood, adjusted my cufflinks, and whispered to myself, "No one buries me twice." The orchestra's melody faded into something softer, uncertain. People laughed again, but it sounded forced. Somewhere across the room, a light flickered, maybe a fuse straining under too much demand. I knew the feeling. They thought they'd erased me from the picture. They hadn't realized yet that I was the one holding the frame. The ballroom had regained its polished calm, but it was the kind of calm that comes after a lightning strike. Bright, brittle, temporary. Guests sat at their tables, pretending to enjoy the plated salmon while exchanging cautious glances, avoiding the memory of what had just happened. The string quartet played louder than before, as if instructed to drown out the whispers. From my seat near the edge of the room, I watched the clock over the bar tick toward 8:15. Every minute sounded like an accusation. I stirred my drink and thought about how power worked in rooms like this. People thought it came from the loudest voice, the biggest name on the wall, the largest yacht in the harbor. They never understood the quiet kind, the kind written in fine print and backed by signatures. The trick to power wasn't using it. It was letting people wonder when you would. Brooke appeared beside my table, her smile painted on but shaking around the edges. "Dad," she hissed through clenched teeth, "please, not tonight. You're embarrassing me." Her voice cracked on the last word. I looked up slowly. "Funny," I said. "I thought I was already dead." The color drained from her face. She blinked hard, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. "It's not what you think." "It never is," I said. She turned away before the tremor in her hands could be seen. As she walked back to her in-laws, a young waiter approached quietly, slipping an envelope onto my table. "They said to give this to you, sir," he murmured. I recognized the neat handwriting of Catherine Shaw, the venue manager. The note was short, Per contract terms, service continues only after final authorization. 9:15 p.m. deadline. The waiter, Miguel Alvarez, his name tag read, hesitated before leaving. "For what it's worth, Mr. Ellison," he whispered. "Everyone on staff knows you're the real client." He nodded once and vanished into the kitchen. The smallest acknowledgement can hit harder than any applause. I looked around the room and realized how the hierarchy was shifting, quietly, invisibly. The people serving the wine and folding the linens respected me more than the people clinking glasses under chandeliers. At the head table, Brooke leaned toward the Caldwells, explaining something in a rush. Harrison Caldwell Sr. stared down his nose at me, his mouth forming a thin line. I couldn't hear him, but I could read his lips. "Control your father, dear, or we will." It wasn't the first time a man like him had underestimated someone who worked with his hands. It would be the last time he underestimated me. My mind drifted to the day Brooke had brought home her engagement contract for me to sign. "It's just symbolic, Dad," she'd said, sliding the papers across the table. "The Caldwells want to keep financial details private. You know how these circles are. I'd signed because I wanted her happiness more than recognition. Now I realized I'd signed my own erasure." Across the ballroom, Catherine caught my eye and subtly pointed to her watch. 45 minutes left. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through the contract files. The non-disparagement clause sat there in legal precision. Should the financier be publicly misrepresented, disrespected, or omitted, all pending escrow authorizations are subject to immediate suspension. I smiled faintly. Paperwork wasn't glamorous, but it never lied. A commotion broke out near the bar. Robert Whitaker, poor, sweating Robert, had drunk past his nerves. "Stand in, Dad," he slurred to a laughing cluster of guests. "That's me." Not the real one, just the rental. His voice cracked with desperation. The laughter died quickly as people realized the truth in his joke. Harrison Sr. barked for security, his tone dripping with embarrassment. Brooke looked ready to collapse. The illusion was collapsing faster than I could have planned. I hadn't lifted a finger. All I'd done was sit and wait, while the truth started leaking through the marble floor. My phone buzzed again. Claire Donnelly, my lawyer. "Reminder, escrow window closes in 30 minutes. Once expired, funds cannot be reissued for 72 hours. You remain in control." The phrase repeated like a drumbeat in my head. In control. 30 minutes until every lie in this room hit the wall. Dessert service began, though most guests only pushed the plates around. A woman at a nearby table leaned toward her friend, whispering too loudly, "Wait, her dad's a plumber?" The word landed like a slap, sharp and echoing. Several heads turned. The orchestra missed a note before recovering. I lifted my glass and took one last sip. The ice gone, the taste warm and heavy. Around me, the chandeliers glittered, the conversation thinned, and every smile looked like it had been painted over a crack. 8:45. 30 minutes to decide how the story ended. I slipped the phone back into my jacket and stood slowly, feeling my pulse even out. They thought they could rewrite my name out of the story before the ink dried, but I was still holding the pen. At exactly 9 o'clock, the orchestra softened to a hum, and the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please welcome Mr. Harrison Caldwell Sr. for a few words." Silverware stilled, chairs shifted. The man at the top of the social pyramid rose from his seat, basking in the attention. His voice carried the polished ease of someone who had never been told no. "Tonight," he began, "we celebrate not only a marriage, but the union of two remarkable families. And we must acknowledge the man who raised Brooke into the woman she is today, Robert Whitaker." Applause thundered through the ballroom. Brooke smiled through trembling lips, gripping Robert's arm, as if she could keep the lie upright through sheer will. The sound of the applause hit me like a physical blow, every clap another nail in the coffin she'd built for me. I stared at my half-empty glass, and in that moment, something finally gave way inside me. The chair scraped against the marble floor as I stood. The noise cut through the applause like a blade. Heads turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence. I walked toward the stage, slow and deliberate, each step echoing through the cavernous hall. The air seemed to hold its breath. Brooke's face drained of color. "Excuse me," I said, reaching the microphone. My voice carried evenly through the speakers. "Before we continue, I'd like to clarify something." Harrison frowned. "Sir, this is not the time." "My name is Mark Ellison," I said, over him. "And I'm Brooke's father." The reaction rippled outward. Gasps, murmurs, confusion. Someone dropped a fork, cameras lifted. I saw Robert freeze, his mouth half open, his entire body telegraphing guilt. Brooke's lips moved, but no sound came out. "What?" "That man," I said, nodding toward Robert, "has never met my daughter before tonight." A few guests laughed nervously, thinking it a joke. But the laughter died when a woman in the back whispered, "He's serious." My attorney, Claire Donnelly, appeared beside me, calm and composed, carrying a black leather folder. She handed me the documents, and I held them up for everyone to see. "These," I said, "are the contracts for tonight's event. Venue rental, catering, music, flowers, photography, transportation, even the fireworks scheduled for 10 o'clock, each one signed by me." Catherine Shaw, the venue manager, came forward cautiously. "Mr. Ellison, these signatures, they're yours?" "They are," I said. "Every payment, every authorization, every arrangement. The total cost, $900,000. Paid by Ellison Construction Group." Phones were already recording. Faces turned to one another, disbelief spreading like wildfire. $900,000? Someone whispered. He paid for everything? Brooke finally found her voice. "Dad, please stop. You're ruining everything." "No," I said quietly, meeting her eyes. "I'm ending what's already ruined." She began to cry, but I didn't waver. My hand tightened around the microphone as Catherine glanced nervously at me. "Mr. Ellison," she said softly, "we still haven't received final payment authorization." "You won't," I said. I reached into my jacket and produced the torn check. The sound of paper ripping filled the silence like thunder. No payment means no service. That's how contracts work. The ballroom went deathly quiet. Catherine hesitated, then pressed her radio to her mouth. "Attention, all staff," she said, voice trembling. "Service suspension effective immediately. Secure all pending transactions." Waiters froze mid-step. The string quartet stopped playing. Lights dimmed halfway as the sound system clicked off. Guests looked around in confusion, some laughing nervously, others realizing it wasn't part of the show. Harrison Caldwell Sr. turned purple. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "You can't just hijack our event. I'll have you arrested." Claire stepped between us. "You'll do no such thing, Mr. Caldwell. My client is enforcing the terms of his own contracts." Whispers erupted across the room. "He's the father? She told everyone he was dead." "She lied?" Brooke dropped to her knees, sobbing. "I just wanted to fit in." "You can't buy belonging, Brooke," I said quietly. "You either earn it or fake it, and fakes always crack." The room had stopped pretending now. The chandeliers gleamed harshly, exposing every false smile, every whispered judgment. The Caldwells stood silent, their empire of image collapsing under the weight of one undeniable truth. Catherine's voice came through the speakers. "Per the client's decision, the event has concluded. Guests, please proceed to the exits in an orderly fashion." The orchestra began packing up. Waiters carried out trays of untouched desserts. The smell of melting candle wax mixed with the panic and humiliation. Guests shuffled toward the doors, whispering and glancing at their phones. I could already imagine the headlines forming. "Bride's real father cancels $900,000 wedding live." Brooke looked up at me through streaked mascara. "Daddy, please." I shook my head slowly. "You wanted to erase me. Tonight, the world remembered who built you." I handed the microphone to Claire, turned, and walked off stage. Behind me, chandeliers flickered as the ballroom descended into chaos. Every step toward the exit felt lighter, as if 30 years of silence were finally lifting from my chest. Outside, the night air was cool and clean, untouched by the stench of pretense. I inhaled deeply and thought, sometimes the only way to fix a broken pipe is to shut off the flow completely. The night air hit me like cold water. For the first time in hours, I could breathe. Behind me, the ballroom buzzed with chaos. Voices overlapping, chandeliers dimming, the echo of music abruptly cut. I leaned against my truck in the courtyard, the distant hum of crickets mocking the noise I'd left behind. My hands were steady, but my pulse still raced like I'd just walked out of a burning building. Claire stepped into the light from the doorway, calm as ever. Her heels clicked against the stone path, briefcase in hand. "You made your point, Mark," she said quietly. "Now we decide whether to end it clean or twist the knife." I let out a low laugh. Always so poetic. "Poetry aside," she said, "you're in control. The contracts give you the right to file a breach and pursue restitution. They owe you 600 grand plus damages." She paused, searching my face. "Or you could walk away and let this be the last word." I didn't answer. Inside, someone shouted my name, then another voice, shrill and panicked. "Brooke." She burst through the doors a moment later, barefoot, her dress torn at the hem. Mascara streaked her face, and for the first time all night, she looked like my daughter again. Small, lost, real. "Dad," she gasped, "please, just listen." I stayed still. "I think you've said enough for one evening." Tears welled in her eyes. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." "No," I said, keeping my tone even. "You humiliated yourself." "I just stopped paying for the performance." She flinched. "You don't understand. I was trying to protect what? Your reputation? Their image?" I nodded toward the glowing ballroom. "You didn't lose me tonight, Brooke. You gave me away months ago." The door opened again, and the Caldwells appeared. Harrison Sr. first, red-faced, followed by his son. They looked less like royalty now, and more like men who'd realized their kingdom had no walls. "Mr. Ellison," Harrison said through gritted teeth, "we can still fix this. I'll compensate you for the misunderstanding. Discretion has its price." I almost laughed. "You still don't get it, do you? Some things can't be bought." His jaw tightened. "Everything has a price." "Then maybe you've been overpaying your whole life." He turned on his heel, muttering to his son, "This isn't over." "Actually," I said, "it is." They disappeared into the night, dragging what remained of their dignity behind them. Brooke sank to the stone steps, her hands shaking. "Dad, I didn't mean to erase you." I was ashamed. Everyone in their world has degrees, titles, family legacies. I didn't want them to think less of me. I crouched in front of her, keeping my voice low. "You think sophistication earns respect? It doesn't. The people who build things, who fix what's broken, that's where dignity lives. You were raised on that, and you threw it away." She cried harder. "I just wanted to belong somewhere." I stood again, watching her crumble under the truth. "You don't belong by pretending, Brooke. You belong by enduring." Claire approached and handed me 2 documents. "You've got a choice," she said softly. "Option 1, file the breach claim. They'll pay, and the court will side with you. Option 2, close it quietly. You're legally clear either way." I looked at Brooke, then at the papers. "What would you do?" "I'd win," Claire said. "But not all victories are the same. If you want justice, take it. If you want peace, leave it." A flash caught my eye. A photographer lingered near the parking gate, camera raised. I walked toward him, pulling out my wallet. "Hand me the card," I said. He hesitated. "Sir, I was hired by the venue." I slid $200 into his hand. "You weren't here. Go home." He nodded, pocketed the money, and disappeared into the dark. When I turned back, Brooke was staring at me through tears. "Why didn't you let him take it? You could have destroyed us completely." "Because I'm done destroying things," I said. "You'll handle that yourself." Claire waited, patient. "So, what'll it be?" I exhaled, the decision already made. "File nothing. Let them clean their own mess." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "That's the rarest kind of win, Mark, the one no one sees." Brooke stood slowly. "Is it too late to fix this?" "It's never too late to start telling the truth," I said. "But truth takes work. The same way I've spent 30 years fixing pipes. You fix it one leak at a time." I opened my truck door. The moonlight glinted off the hood, pale and steady. Brooke reached out a trembling hand, but I didn't take it. Not yet. I started the engine. In the mirror, the venue lights flickered like dying embers. For the first time in a long while, I felt light, not triumphant, not vengeful, just free. I drove away, leaving the echo of music, lies, and broken chandeliers behind. Some things you rebuild, others you leave standing in ruins as a reminder. I'd spent my life fixing what was broken, but sometimes the only way to fix something is to let it break completely. The morning after the wedding, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Every alert, every call, every vibration was another headline, another opinion about the man who'd canceled his daughter's $900,000 wedding in real time. My name, Mark Ellison, was everywhere. Some called me a hero, others a monster. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, the television humming quietly in the background. "Unbelievable," the morning anchor said. "A father reveals he funded the entire wedding and canceled it live after being erased from the ceremony. Social media is divided. Was this justice or cruelty?" They played footage of me tearing the check. I looked older on camera, colder, but my voice still sounded steady, deliberate. I muted the TV and let the silence return. The world had turned my pain into content. Claire texted a short update. "All contracts cleared, legally bulletproof, you're untouchable." A moment later came another message from Catherine Shaw, the venue manager. "For what it's worth, you handled yourself with more dignity than anyone I've ever worked with." I stared at that last line for a long time. Dignity. That was the only word that mattered now. By noon, the Caldwells were already trending too, though not the way they liked. Caldwell family faces backlash after wedding scandal. Local gossip blogs were gleeful. National papers picked it up by evening. Charity boards quietly scrubbed their names from upcoming events. A major real estate deal fell through within hours. The mighty had fallen, not from financial ruin, but from public humiliation, something they'd never known how to survive. I didn't feel triumph, just a hollow kind of justice. Brooke hadn't called. I told myself it was better that way. She needed time to feel the gravity of what she'd done. The contracts had made me whole financially. The rest would take something no lawyer could deliver. That night, I sat in my office above the shop. The hum of the neon sign outside, Ellison Construction Group, filled the room. The smell of sawdust from the workshop below lingered faintly in the air. It was the scent of real work, of the life I'd built from scratch. My phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't news. It was a text from her. "They've cut me off. I don't know where to go." I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone face down and watched the city lights flicker beyond the window. Silence had become my language lately, and I needed her to understand it. The next morning, when I visited one of our job sites, the guys treated me differently, respectfully. A few clapped me on the back. "Hell of a thing you did," one said. "Takes guts to stand up for yourself like that." Another added, "You did what every father dreams of. Made them feel what they made you feel." Their support meant more than any headline. It reminded me who I was before the tuxedo, before the lies. Just a man who fixed things and kept his word. Still, guilt hovered. I thought of Brooke as a little girl, standing beside me while I repaired the porch railing, asking questions about every nail, I remembered promising her she'd never have to struggle like I did, and maybe that was my mistake. I'd given her comfort without teaching her what it costs. 3 days passed before she showed up. I was reviewing blueprints when the door creaked open. She stepped inside wearing jeans, sneakers, and a faded sweater. No makeup, no pretense. Her eyes were red, her voice small. "You weren't answering my texts." "I wanted you to sit with the silence you gave me," I said. She lowered her gaze. "I deserve that." We stood there for a while, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the space between us. Then she said, "The Caldwells won't speak to me. They said I embarrassed them. Everyone's talking about the video. I can't even go online." I poured her a cup of coffee, slid it across the desk. "Welcome to my world," I said. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "I ruined everything." "No," I said quietly. "You ruined a lie. That's the start of something real." Later that day, Claire called. "The networks want interviews," she said. "You could make a fortune from this. Talk shows, podcasts, maybe even a book." "No," I said. "If I start performing, I become just like them." Claire chuckled softly. "You're consistent, I'll give you that." By evening, the media frenzy had shifted to other scandals. That's how the world works. Outrage has a short shelf life. But inside my office, time moves slower. Brooke sat across from me, tracing her finger along a stack of invoices, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought money made people respect you," she said. "Now I realize respect is what makes money matter." I didn't answer. Words weren't what she needed. I handed her a folder with a list of job openings in my company's residential division. "You want to learn about respect? Start there. 8 a.m., Monday." Her eyes widened, then softened. She nodded. "Okay." We sat in silence again, not as strangers, but as something closer to equals. For the first time in years, the quiet between us didn't feel like punishment. It felt like the beginning of something honest. The Monday after the wedding felt heavier than any morning I could remember. The sun hadn't fully climbed above the San Diego skyline when I stepped onto the construction yard. Fog drifted low across the asphalt, wrapping the steel beams and equipment in pale silence. I had rebuilt hundreds of things in my life: pipes, homes, businesses, but never something as fragile as trust. Brooke stood near the supply shed, wearing an oversized work vest that nearly swallowed her frame. She looked out of place, but she was there, and that was enough for a start. The crew noticed her immediately. These were men and women who'd worked beside me for years, through heat waves and deadlines, through nights when I personally loaded concrete because a delivery was late. They knew what had happened. Most had watched the wedding unfold on local news. Still, not one said a word. They nodded to her, polite but cautious, the way people do when they see someone climbing out of wreckage. I handed her a clipboard. "Inventory and delivery logs," I said. "Start with the West Yard." She nodded quickly, grateful for the task, and disappeared among the pallets. Watching her work that first day was both painful and humbling. She struggled with the pace, tripped on uneven ground, and dropped a box of pipe fittings that clattered across the concrete. But she didn't quit. Sweat darkened her collar by noon, and when Miguel Alvarez, one of our part-timers and, ironically, the same waiter from that ill-fated reception, offered to help, she thanked him and kept going. Later he came to me, wiping dust off his gloves. "She's trying, boss," he said simply. "That counts." He was right. By midweek, the fog had lifted, both in the sky and in my chest. The newspapers had moved on to new scandals. I got an email from a journalist offering an exclusive redemption interview. I deleted it without reading past the subject line. Fame was loud. Integrity was quiet. I'd already made my choice about which one I wanted. Brooke began staying late, even after the others clocked out. I'd find her in the trailer office, flipping through manuals or learning software we used for estimates. Once she returned a client call about a plumbing emergency and handled it with such calm professionalism that the man emailed me later to compliment my new office manager. I didn't correct him. For the first time in years, I felt something close to pride, small but steady. One night as I watched her carry boxes into storage, I thought about her mother, my late wife. She used to say, Don't raise her to need protection. Raise her to deserve trust. I'd failed that once, thinking money could replace presence, that providing was the same as parenting. Now, seeing Brooke rebuild piece by piece, I realized this was my second chance to do it right. By Friday, the rhythm of the yard had adjusted around her. The crew stopped whispering. Miguel joked with her about her messy handwriting on the logs, and she laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years that wasn't forced or performative. That afternoon, I found her sitting on the loading dock, watching the sunset stain the sky orange and gold. I sat beside her. She didn't speak at first, just breathed in the cooling air. "I didn't think I could start over," she said quietly. "But it feels clean." I nodded. That's what happens when you stop pretending. 2 days later, she came to me with something unexpected. "Dad, one of the Caldwell executives reached out," she said nervously. "They offered me a PR job. They want me to help rebuild their image." For a moment, I felt that old anger rise, but I kept my tone even. "You'll know you've changed when you don't need their approval to prove it." She thought for a long time, then shook her head. I told them no. It was the first decision she'd made in years that didn't need my advice. The following week, I left an old wrench on her desk. It was from my first contracting job in '89, steel worn smooth, handle engraved with her initials. When she found it, she looked at me in surprise. "It's not pretty," I told her, "but it's real. That's what matters." She turned it over in her hands like a sacred object. No words, just tears that said more than any apology could. That evening, as we locked up, the city lights flickered alive in the distance. The sound of drills and trucks faded, replaced by a kind of peace I hadn't known since before the wedding. Brooke walked beside me, still unsure, but grounded in something solid again. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a speech or a promise. It was a practice. And for the first time in a long time, we were both showing up. A month after the wedding, the noise had faded, but the silence it left behind felt different, solid, earned. The newspapers had moved on, but the story still floated through online forums and gossip columns. Sometimes I'd hear my name mentioned at a hardware store or whispered in a restaurant. I no longer winced when it happened. Being invisible had once meant being ignored. Now it meant peace. The company was busier than ever. My office at Hayes Contracting buzzed with phone calls, clients, and job site updates. We'd taken on new contracts, bigger ones, not because of sympathy, but because people respected what they'd seen. A man who stood his ground. Funny thing about scandal, it destroys some people, but it clarifies others. The Whitmores weren't so lucky, or rather the Caldwells, as the local press corrected. Their empire of image was collapsing. Preston Caldwell Sr. had lost 2 major development deals after partners withdrew, citing ethical concerns. Their name had quietly vanished from the charity circuit. Brooke told me she had read that their Greenwich estate was listed for sale, off-market. They wanted to avoid attention, but humiliation doesn't stay private for long. One night, I found Brooke at the office after hours. She was sitting at the reception desk, pen in hand, writing in a leather-bound notebook. I was about to say something when I saw the words on the page. Integrity isn't inherited, it's practiced. She didn't notice me standing there. I didn't interrupt. For the first time, I knew she wasn't just apologizing, she was learning. The next morning, I received 3 letters in the mail. One from an old client who wrote, "You reminded us what accountability looks like." Another from a small business association inviting me to speak at a seminar about workplace ethics. I'd laughed out loud when I read it. Me, a plumber turned contractor with calloused hands, lecturing about ethics to men in suits? Still, I accepted. Because sometimes, the lesson hits hardest when it's told in plain words. Meanwhile, Brooke was slowly earning her place. She managed scheduling, handled payroll, and even learned to operate our project software. The crew no longer saw her as the boss's daughter. They saw her as Brooke, the coworker who stayed late, who showed up early, who never used her last name to get ahead. That was worth more than any degree or inheritance. Then one afternoon, a courier delivered an envelope sealed with gold trim. Inside was a letter from Preston Caldwell Sr. The tone was polished, the handwriting confident. He offered to reimburse the full $900,000 wedding cost as a gesture of goodwill to settle all unpleasantness. I stared at the page, half in disbelief, half in pity. There it was again, the same arrogance dressed as civility. I folded the letter, tore it in two, and mailed the pieces back with a single note. You can't buy dignity twice. That evening, Margaret Henderson stopped by my office. She'd been one of the guests who witnessed the chaos firsthand. "Jim," she said, smiling, "did you know your story's being used in business ethics classes at Yale? They call it the contractor's lesson." I laughed until my eyes stung. Somewhere in that irony, I found closure. The same school that had once made my daughter ashamed of me was now teaching her father's choices as a moral example. 2 weeks later, Brooke invited me to dinner at her small apartment downtown. It was modest, bare walls, thrift store furniture, but spotless. She made chicken and rice, simple and honest. We ate slowly, talking about work, about her mother, about the strange quiet of life after storms. "I finally understand what Mom meant by earned respect," she said. I raised my glass. "Then let's toast to the work ahead." That night, after she walked me to the door, I turned and said, "Starting next week, you'll be assistant manager. Not because you're my daughter, but because you've earned it." Her eyes widened. "I won't let you down." "I know," I said. "You already stopped doing that the day you showed up." Driving home, city lights blurred across my windshield like strands of memory. Pride had cost us both dearly, her illusions, my peace. But it had bought something priceless: understanding. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't the absence of anger. It was the presence of clarity. As the freeway stretched ahead, I thought about that night at the wedding, about the humiliation, the torn check, the silence that followed. My daughter had once pretended not to know me, but now she finally saw me, not as a plumber, not as a wallet, but as a father who never stopped believing she could learn the cost of pride. The mornings felt different now, quiet, steady, filled with purpose instead of noise. I spent my early hours in the garage workshop, sanding an old oak toolbox that had belonged to my father. The smell of sawdust and machine oil carried me back decades, to when I was a boy watching him work in this same light. Back then, I didn't understand that fixing things was never just about the tools. It was about discipline, patience, and the belief that anything broken could be rebuilt if you cared enough to try. Brooke arrived just after sunrise, holding 2 coffees and wearing a hard hat that sat a little crooked on her head. "Morning," she said, setting 1 cup beside the toolbox. "We landed the Riverside renovation contract, $4.8 million. Her voice was calm but bright with pride. I looked at her, confident, professional, grounded, and felt something inside me loosen. "Congratulations," I said. "That's not luck. That's work." She smiled. For once, she didn't downplay it or apologize. She'd earned her success, and we both knew it. She pulled something from her bag, a framed photo. It was of the 2 of us, taken years ago at a construction site. We were covered in mud, grinning like fools. Below it, an inscription read, "For teaching me the difference between living rich and living right." My throat tightened. I didn't say anything. Some words didn't need to be spoken to be understood. Later, as she reviewed blueprints at my desk, I found myself thinking about that night at the wedding, the heat in my chest, the humiliation, the crowd stares. I'd thought revenge meant public payback. But standing here now, in a sunlit workshop with my daughter building something real, I realized I'd been wrong. The real victory wasn't tearing down her illusion. It was watching her learn how to stand on her own 2 feet. "Dad," she said suddenly, breaking my thoughts, "I've been invited to speak at a youth mentorship event next week. They want me to talk about resilience." She hesitated, fiddling with the frame's edge. "But what if people still judge me for everything?" I shook my head. "Then tell them the truth. They'll remember that longer than your mistakes." She nodded, the kind of nod that comes from someone ready to walk into their own story. That afternoon, I called her into my office and slid a folder across the desk. 20% ownership in Hayes Contracting, I said. Effective today. She stared at me, stunned. Dad, This isn't a reward, I interrupted. It's a responsibility. You'll keep it only as long as you remember what it took to earn it. She pressed her lips together, holding back tears, and whispered, I won't forget. We opened the restored toolbox together that evening. Inside, beneath the worn hammers and screwdrivers, was a small brass plaque engraved with 5 words. Integrity builds more than walls. She traced them gently with her finger. You always knew how to say the important things without saying them, she murmured. I smiled. Guess you finally started listening. Over the following weeks, I watched her lead meetings, mentor interns, and manage projects with a confidence that didn't come from money or reputation. It came from character. I started slowing down, taking days off to fish or read. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't afraid to rest. Brooke had it handled. One evening, as I locked the workshop, I caught sight of that framed photo again. The muddy, smiling faces frozen in time. For years, she'd pretended not to know me, blinded by a world that confused wealth with worth. But now, every day she came to work, every decision she made, she reminded me of who I'd been all along, a father who built something that would last longer than money, respect. And that, I thought as I turned off the light, was the real measure of forgiveness. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.